I've just received a very exciting box of books and we're going to open them together. I've been told they're from a Tolkien family member, but I don't know more than that. So let's see what we can uncover. I got an email last week from a colleague who said they had some books that were in absolutely awful condition, but that they came from a descendant of J.R.R. Tolkien. And so when they asked if I wanted to work through them and catalogue them for them and then sell them together, I jumped at the opportunity. I said, box them up and send them straight down to me. But they added a caution, these books are scrappy, they're in terrible condition, some have been read to death, so they're absolutely falling apart. And this is a concern in a lot of book collecting. If we were trying to collect pristine examples of the first edition of a text, then the condition is very, very important. But these are what we call association copies, where their association or provenance history, prior ownership are what is most important. And if the previous owner of a book is the most important thing about it or the most interesting thing about it, don't you want them to have read them? And don't you want them to have read them more than once and read them so much that pages fall out and you have to stick pages back in again? That's exactly what I want from a book like this. So if they're in terrible condition, that doesn't concern me. So all that's left to do then is to get started, open up the box and start going through the books. We've got the first book up here, and this looks like a children's book to me from the box, through the wrapping paper, and it is. It's in a bit of a state, but you can see the front cover here and the spine here, which says All the Mowgli Stories by Rudyard Kipling. So this is a collection of the Jungle Book stories. It looks around 1920 to me. I don't know, it's a bit late. It's from 1933, and it's an illustrated collection of the Jungle Book stories, illustrated by Stuart Tresillian. And I'll just show you here the frontispiece illustration. So that's a very lovely children's book to start off with, and if we look at the front free end paper, we can see at least two inscriptions and maybe three. We can see in the middle of the page there it says Michael H.R. Tolkien, and then we have a second inscription at the top of the page which says Michael H.R. Tolkien from Helen Buckhurst, Oxford, December 1933. So Michael H.R. Tolkien is J.R.R.'s and Edith's second son. He was born in 1920. So Christmas 1933, he'd have been, I guess, 13 years old. And Helen Buckhurst, this is actually really interesting because she was a scholar of Icelandic literature at Oxford. I'm pretty sure she studied under Tolkien. He was due to supervise her thesis, and then she, worked in Oxford and got to know the family, as this is testament to. She got to know the family so much that she became Priscilla Tolkien, J.R.R. and Edith's only daughter. Helen Buckhurst was her godmother, and in her scholarly work, it's been suggested that because she worked on Icelandic literature and mythology, that the trolls turning to stone in the sunlight myth that obviously Tolkien employs in The Hobbit comes from her. He found out about that through her work. So this is an incredibly exciting book to hold, not just from the Tolkien family library, not just owned and read by Michael Tolkien, and one would assume by the other Tolkien children, but also a gift, a very special gift given by an important colleague and figure in the Tolkien family's life. So the condition isn't great. You can see it's rubbed and frayed and splitting, but none of that matters because we have a book that would have been there in the library they would have been at 22 Northmoor Road at this point, I believe, or would it be number 20? And 20 Northmoor Road at this point. And yeah, utterly wonderful to see these classic children's stories, but from the household where in the 1930s The Hobbit was starting to be told and written and conjured. So that is a very, very good start. Okay, so next up we've got, I think, 2 books in this bubble bag by the look of it, and 3 books even, 3 for the price of 1 here. Let's go through them one by one. This is a children's book called Beasts, shown to the children. It looks early 20th century to me. I don't know if it's going to be dated. No, it's not. I would have thought around 1910 this was published. And it's a book where it looks like we have descriptions of different animals, or beasts as they call it, along with illustrations. And if we see here, oh wow, this is very early. This is, we can see Michael Tolkien's ownership inscription, M.H.R. Tolkien, and the date, very, very early indeed, February 1928. So he would have just been 7 years old when he wrote in this book, an incredibly early ownership inscription. And this will have dated then to the first house that the Tolkiens had on Northmoor Road in Oxford, when this would have been in the library. And you can see here it's been absolutely read to death. There are pages and plates loose. I'll have to go through and check that it's complete. There's our Indian elephant, or oliphant maybe, you can see there. But what a lovely thing. I doubt very much we'll have anything earlier than this in this little collection of books, but a beautiful, beautiful children's book there. Next up in this pile we have, oh, wonderful, this is The Children of Odin. Again, this is probably a book from a similar kind of period. 1929 this was published, with illustrations by Willy Pagani, the Hungarian illustrator. So a beautiful edition of sort of Norse mythology with his illustrations there. And if we look to the front end paper of this volume, this is actually later. So this is, again, Michael Tolkien's copy, Michael H.R. Tolkien, Scarborough, but October 19th, 1959. So he would have been in his late 30s at this point and had children. But still lovely that he's buying a children's book. So this won't have been in the sort of Tolkien family library that he grew up in, but instead perhaps bought it to read to his children. They, of course, knew about Norse mythology from their father's work. So it's really lovely to see that thread running through. And Michael Tolkien has this wonderful and distinctive way of inscribing his books by having his name with the initials in red, and then the exact date of acquisition and the place of acquisition as well. So it's always wonderful holding his books because you can time travel to exactly the time and place where he first acquired it. So that is absolutely wonderful. And our last book from this bubble bag is a copy of Robin Hood, illustrated by Walter Crane, and this has clearly been enjoyed over and over again. So we just have his name here, Michael H.R. Tolkien, to the front free end paper, no date and place. That's obviously something he started doing later. And then here's the title page, barely staying together. You can see these pages have been repaired already by the Tolkiens and stuck back in, or perhaps just given some extra support. We can look here. I think we do actually have a loose page here, the illustration of Robin Hood and Friar Tuck. But it's utterly clear to me that this is a book that's been read over and over again. And, you know, Tolkien as not just an academic and storyteller, but as a professor, you know, deeply interested in English folklore and history. And so it's really wonderful to think of this copy of Robin Hood on their shelf. I imagine he was a sort of somewhere between the ages of 8 and 13 at this stage, just going off his handwriting. So they would have almost certainly been at their second house in Northmoor Road in Oxford when this book was added to the family library. And you know, who knows? Perhaps they each read it in turn or enjoyed the stories together. But what a wonderful thing! A copy of Robin Hood from the Tolkien family library. Well, I'm slightly overwhelmed with that start. That is far better than I expected. It's always so interesting to see the formative books that people read, and also the books that their parents will have encouraged them to read. I mean, we can learn so much from that, not just what people seek out to read, but the books that they're given, like that, the Jungle Book stories given to Michael by an academic colleague of J.R.R. Tolkien's. This is probably a book read a little later in life. This is the Herries Chronicle by Hugh Walpole, which is a sequence of 4 novels. They're obviously presented here in one volume. I don't really know the novels well. And you can see that this is in a sorry state as well. Look how stained the covers are, and we've got sellotape on the binding. Please never use sellotape to repair your books. They'll leave awful stains. But I suppose the Tolkiens didn't worry about that. They were more concerned about just keeping the book together so that it could be enjoyed again and again. So this was bought, we can see here, at Thornton and Son Booksellers, 11 the Broad, Oxford. So bought at Thornton's. And we've got the title page here, and then we've got 2 inscriptions here. One by Michael and one by the person who gave it to him. So we can see here, it says, to Michael from S. Dardenne. So there's a presentation inscription. And then on the other side, we have Michael's own handwriting. Michael H.R. Tolkien from S. Dardenne, December 4th, 1939. This is another fascinating item because the S. Dardenne that has given this book to Michael Tolkien is someone called Simone Dardenne, who was a Belgian philologist and a scholar of Middle English, who worked very, very closely with Tolkien at this time in the 1930s. She, I think, initially studied under him before working together. She published an important edition of Saint Julien in the probably just before this actually, but they were working so closely together that she was one of the original recipients of an author's copy of The Hobbit when The Hobbit came out in 1937, and this is a gift given December 1939, so just a couple of years after that. But a hugely important academic figure. We're at 1939 now, so Michael Tolkien would have been, I guess, 19, and probably at university at this stage. I don't know his educational dates off by heart. But that's a great association, an important academic colleague of Tolkien's. There is actually a during the war, Tolkien was sort of lobbying the British Council to try and be able to get Simone over to Britain, so that she could come to Oxford, and he was trying to get the British Council to sort of sponsor her coming here, because she's such an important, or was such an important scholar of Middle English. So that is a really wonderful thing, to not just have someone's book, but something that's been picked out for them. She's gone to Thornton's, the main bookshop in Oxford back then, and picked out this book and then given it to him in December 1933. So that's a wonderful association copy in spite of the poor condition. So that can join the others on the shelf up here. Okay, next up we've got another bubble bag filled with books. How many do we have in here? We have 2 books in this one. Let's have a look and see. Well, you can see one's an Oxford Dictionary and one is a collection of John Dryden's poetry. Hey, but this is wonderful. Oh, and that is too. So we'll do these in order. This was a book inscribed in 1967. So later than the other books we've seen so far. And you can see it says Judith M.R. Tolkien, Stonyhurst, October 1967, from Daddy. And then we can also see up in this corner, we've got Judith's monogram and date. Very, very similar to what her grandfather, J.R.R. Tolkien, does with his monogram. And also her father, Michael, signs books with a similar monogram sometimes. So a gift of John Dryden's poetry from her father. And, oh gosh, look at this. It's not only that, but she's annotated this copy of John Dryden's poetry as well. So that is absolutely fantastic. All through it, we have these annotations by her. And then moving on a couple years, we have our Oxford English Dictionary. So this is a very similar thing, another gift from father to daughter. This, you can see it says Judith M.R. Tolkien, Stonyhurst, Christmas 1969. And then it says, from Daddy with love and a basic aid towards the realisation of your ultimate ambition. And again, we can see at the top her signed monogram. So we're on to the next bubble bag now, and we've had some fantastic books so far, mainly Michael Tolkien's books or inscribed by him, and you can see the sort of lineage there. They've gone from, you know, Michael, or sometimes from, you know, people like colleagues of J.R.R.'s to Michael, and then down to Judith. We have two books here, both French themed, one on the French Revolution and one Arthur Young's travels in France. We'll do the French Revolution first. This is an older book, so I imagine it was probably bought second hand. This is printed in 1918. And again, a lovely ownership inscription or presentation inscription. We have Judith M.R. Tolkien, Stonyhurst, September 1967, from Daddy. A wonderful, touching thing to see the books that a father gives a daughter. And our other book on a French theme here, Arthur Young's Travels in France, around the time of the French Revolution. So perhaps that was an area of interest for Judith, because this is actually inscribed at the exact same time, or a month later even, October 1967. Judith M.R. Tolkien, Stonyhurst, October 1967, from Daddy. So two more very touching, very personal gifts from father to daughter. And, you know, through these books now we can begin to build a picture of their relationship and the interests that they had and what they shared with each other. So they're really wonderful. We've got a few more books in here, so let's have a look. These are all more modern paperback books. We'll start here with Philip Larkin Required Writing, a collection of essays by Philip Larkin, a book I know well. Oh, and this is another, we can tick another Tolkien family member off here, because it says, for Alan and Judy, with much love for Christmas 1984, from Prisca, as in short for Priscilla Tolkien, who would have been Judith Tolkien's aunt, of course, Priscilla Tolkien, J.R.R. and Edith's only daughter. A wonderful Christmas present of Philip Larkin's writing. And here we've got the other paperbacks, M.V. Hughes's. M.V. Hughes wrote a quartet of sort of memoirs about growing up and living in London. This is 3 of them. And these, oh lovely, oh wonderful. So each of these is also inscribed by Priscilla for Judith. You can see for Judy, with lots of love, Prisca, Christmas 1979. And we have the same inscriptions across the other 2 volumes as well. Maybe there was a 4th and it went missing, or maybe she just got these 3. But what wonderful things from an aunt to a niece. It's looking through this now and watching this now, it might feel like books from Tolkien family members' library are common, you know, because after all, I'm showing you an awful lot of them. Then they're not. They're hard to find in any context. And for these to be such personal things as well, gifts specifically selected and shared between them is a really, really special thing, and a privilege, really, to be able to hold and look at and share with you, and, you know, ultimately find new homes for. Those books will be offered for sale on my website. I don't know when this will go out, so they may or may not still be available by the time you see this. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed going through that very special thing, something you don't see every day, a whole shelf of books from a Tolkien family collection.